So with that, we'll get started. Thank you all of the attendees for being here, as well as all of our panelists. I was going to ask if we don't clap, but that wouldn't make sense because we can't see all of you. But anyway, so thank you all for your time. So today we will be engaging in a conversation about activism in academia. Just as background, this is being hosted by the Asian American Psych Association's Division of Students. We sent out a poll to all of the students asking what topic you'd like to hear most about, and this one, activism in academia, won by a good margin. So I hope this is a fulfilling conversation. So what the structure of this webinar will look like is that first, each of our esteemed panelists will introduce themselves and what their experience with activism has been like so far. And then after that, I will ask questions that have been pre-submitted from the people who RSVP'd. And then towards the end, we'll have time for those in the audience to ask questions of their own. So if anyone has any questions throughout the presentation, feel free to use the Q&A function, and then we will address them when most appropriate. Okay. So would any of our panelists be open to introducing yourselves first?
Sure.
Sure. My name is Dr. Nellie Tran. I'm an assistant professor at San Diego State University. I'm also the director of research and development at our community-based clinic. And I'm also the vice president of the Asian American Psychological Association. I'm really excited about this conversation. Activism has been something that I've been involved in since college, but I think that my form of activism has taken lots of different paths depending on where I have been personally and professionally. So I think in college it looked more, what I think feels more traditional these days, you know, being on the streets and marching, doing petitions, doing more civic election-based activism. Over the years, I feel like I've done more activism. You know, I consider myself an activist scholar. My research, my teaching, my writing, I believe to be ways that I use my voice to create change. So I consider those to be my activism. And then I've, in the last couple years, have kind of returned to doing more on the ground work. So I've always I'm a community psychologist by training, so my work naturally takes me into the community to do work alongside folks who are already on the ground. So I think that the activism piece within my work comes naturally, but I've been much more involved. Right now at San Diego State, we're right on the border, so been much more involved in the work of asylum seekers at the border. My program, for example, has done recently, just last weekend, the program and our students held healing circles in Mexico, so on the TJ side, for activists that have been providing services to the asylum seekers. I've been working on the ground with folks to connect the shelter here in San Diego with resources around town, donations, and then raising funds for what we're calling pocket money. So there have been kind of places in which federal resources aren't available that I kind of fill these gaps and niches in the organization. So that's kind of some of the ways that and those are all things that I should say I count as my professional work. So I get credit for it for tenure and such as well. And I found ways to write about it to be a part of my academic professional work. That
Great.
Good?
Yes, that's wonderful. Thank you so much for sharing, Nellie, and we're looking forward to hearing more about all these things. Okay. Anyone be willing to go next?
I guess I'll go. My name is Gilbert, so I am a doctoral candidate at this point. I'm on internship at New Mexico State University. I guess my activism has, just been the past few years. I'd say it started off from kind of like a more naive place, and then sort of developing connections in my doctoral program with students who are also invested in social justice. Really opened my eyes and really became involved. I think sort of my first activist activity I kind of sort of fell into at my university, they were circulating these like health tips and fortune cookies, which I kind of didn't really like, and then talked to the people, the director of the counseling center, and wrote a letter saying, you know, why I didn't like this, and eventually got those removed across the university. And that was kind of my first foray into it. And then I think a lot of my practical experiences kind of led to this increased awareness. So I worked at a substance abuse treatment center primarily for African Americans, and that really opened my eyes to some of the disparities out there. And then shortly thereafter, I got involved at 2016's APA, so I led sort of a protest / sort of urging APA to support Black Lives Matter, working with some Black psychologists. Because that's how people tend to know me. And then afterwards, I served on the subcommittee for social action in Division 17 for a little bit. And then in my current research, I'm looking at some structural equation models about how activism intentions develop. And then right now I'm at New Mexico State University, and we're in the borderlands area too, so we're pretty close to the border. So working on supporting marginalized students here has been my focus this year.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing. Looking forward to hearing more about that. You said the word structural equation modeling, and then I felt scared for a little bit. But I loved hearing the rest and that too. So thank you so much. Okay, would someone be willing to go next?
I guess.
Please feel free.
I guess I can go next. So, you know, it's an interesting question, because for me, activism has been kind of tied hand in hand with realizing that there's inequality, right? Like all of us, you know, I think by and large, the people in this webinar are Asian American, right? So I think we've all been, you know, we've all had the worldview where we have oppression kind of laid upon us, right? So for me, it's my activism has emerged and increased with the amount of health disparity, just inequality in general, that I've seen and experienced. So, I mean, I would say my activism really emerged like in high school, you know, just in terms of different issues that I was passionate about. And, you know, in terms of, you know, it was very different when I was in high school. You know, we didn't talk about like a lot of race politics, you know, you didn't talk about privilege, and, you know, things weren't, you just didn't discuss things, even though it was just a couple of decades ago. Well, I mean, I'm not that old, but, you know, it's only been more recent that we talk a lot about the issues that we do. So in terms of my work, you know, undergrad kind of lit that, you know, switch where I wanted to be involved in mental health, and especially for multicultural populations, because even in undergrad, I saw there was a lot of health disparities, and, you know, consideration of worldview in terms of different cultures wasn't as widespread as I thought it should be. So, you know, for graduate school, I chose programs that haven't had an emphasis on race, ethnicity, multiculturalism. Training emerged, and in my clinical work, again, you know, it was primarily people in the public sector, you know, people of color, LGBTQA individuals. But again, what I was seeing time and time again, even though the people might be different, that there was a lot of systemic injustice. We're still dealing with a lot of issues that weren't being addressed. So then I started becoming increasingly involved in policy work. So doing policy as a psychologist. So I worked with APA, and it was their public interest directorate, and I helped lobbyists. So, you know, I'd help lobby policy. You know, back then it was like the Healthcare Reform Act. So, you know, just a wide array of things. You know, ICE didn't have ethical guidelines, you know, so there was skyrocketing, you know, rates of everything in terms of abuse and neglect. And, you know, just my portfolio specifically dealt with people of color, LGBTQA individuals, students, refugees, immigrants, women, and children. So those were the populations I was passionate about, and I got to work with them from a policy standpoint, working as a psychologist. So a lot of mental health research tied with policy in a political sector, which I felt was, really rewarding, and also kind of made me realize that we need to function more as psychologists within the realm of policy and social justice. And so, then I started working with other organizations, mental health organizations, that, dealt with populations that were underserved. Lots of people of color, lots of refugees, families, people with chronic illness and disabilities. So was very involved in policy, and that was federally, and then went into city and state research and clinical outcomes and program development for one of the biggest mental public health systems in Houston. Currently, I am assistant professor at Baylor College of Medicine, and I am staff psychologist at Bentop Hospital, which is the biggest public hospital, I think, in the nation. It's level 1 trauma. It has all of these things, but it's a big public hospital that, primarily serves a huge portion of underserved and multicultural populations in the Houston area. And I supervise postdocs, and I lecture to medical residents, and a lot of interface with medical students as well. But what I lecture about and what I bring to the table is a lot of the issues that we talk about when we talk about social justice and multiculturalism. And a lot of, our training is very good in the sense that we cover and we get to talk about these issues, but other mental health providers don't. So bringing that to them, and they don't get to learn about that. And that's a lot of my professional work in terms of the job I have currently, but personally, I'm part of a lot of different organizations, and I am an activist in a lot of different ways outside of work too. And, the interesting part that I think we have to cultivate is how do we tie the two? And so I'm also part of a lot of coalitions and organizations that are against child detention and detention in general, because we serve a lot of undocumented. A lot of my patients are undocumented. I've even had to see somebody in ICE custody, so all of my patients deal with systemic issues where I get to provide a voice, I get to advocate for them, and I get to help train new generations of mental health providers, doctors, and psychologists that can make a difference, or at least have the insight enough to know that we need to change things.
Great. Thank you so much for providing an overview of your experiences. It sounds like you've been able to engage in a lot of meaningful ways. So I'm looking forward to hearing more about those. Dr. Nadine Nakamura.
Yeah, as the last one in, I wanted to be the last one to speak. So, so I think similar to some others, my activism originally looked a lot like marching and demonstrations. I was lucky as a little kid that my parents introduced me to that. And so there's something about being kind of out in a crowd that feels very comfortable. And I think I felt frustrated as a graduate student because I was doing a lot of individual work with clients, and I didn't see how the two connected to each other. And there was a time when I was in graduate school, and I don't know if any graduate students can kind of relate to this, but I used to fantasize about all the other things I could be doing with my time that would be more meaningful, because it felt very isolating at times, and like I was treating individual people and working on my individual research, and I just felt like maybe this isn't the right way to do things. In the meantime, I was getting involved in LGBTQ activism, specifically doing a lot of stuff around same-sex marriage. I was in a relationship with a woman who was not a US citizen, and so I was really aware of the limitations to our relationship because of her immigration status, her visa status. And so I was doing the student thing on the one hand, and then doing this kind of personal activism on the side. And I was at APA in Honolulu in maybe 2004, and the APA Council passed a resolution in support of same-sex marriage. And it was really exciting to see the organization take that stand. And at the same time, I remember going back to the division suite and saying, well, what about people who are in same-sex binational relationships? There's legislation to support that that's being talked about? What can APA do to support that? And I was told by someone, well, there's no research on that. So APA can't take policy stances on things when there's no research. So at the time I felt very shut down, but I also kind of felt inspired, like, well, maybe that's something I need to do something about. And so, that really kind of had me thinking about how I could involve myself in doing research that would have policy implications. At the time I was doing research on HIV, and I, over time, shifted the focus of my research to LGBTQ immigration, in part because that became my life. After I graduated from my PhD program, I, within a few months, moved to Canada for immigration reasons related to my significant other. And, her trying to stay in North America and to not have to go back to Malaysia. It became increasingly difficult for her to stay on a work visa in the US. The economy was not doing so well, and she got a job offer in Canada, which was incredibly frightening for me as a newly graduated person, because I left everything I knew in terms of my professional connections. I had a postdoc, a really good postdoc, and I had to tell my new boss, okay, well, I'm going to leave the country now. So I felt like I was doing a really bad thing in terms of my career, and I really didn't know how I was going to come back. And so when I was in Canada, I started meeting a lot of other people who were in very similar situations to us, a lot of same-sex binational couples, and they became our friends and our support network. But at the same time, I realized, they have a lot of the same, concerns that I do, and their stories aren't being documented. And so that started a process for me doing qualitative research on the topic that nobody else at the time was doing. And, that gave me the opportunity to see how I could start moving my research in a way that would potentially have policy implications for issues that I really cared about. So during that time, a few things happened. I think it was AB 1070 in Arizona was passed, and I was involved with Division 44, the LGBTQ division in APA, and I was involved in writing a policy statement or something along those lines. And that gave me like a little taste, like, oh, I can use psychological language to take a political stand on something that I care about. Shortly thereafter, there was a call for Melba Vasquez was president of APA, and she was putting together a presidential task force on immigration. And here I was living in Canada, had no strong professional affiliations anymore. And I thought, well, I'm going to apply for this. I'm early career, but I really want LGBTQ issues to be considered in the discussion about immigration. And I never see them integrated in the psychological discussions about this topic. So I figured, what the heck, let's try it. And I was selected to be on the task force, and was like completely intimidated, but was excited to have the opportunity to do what I could, which was challenging because there was really very, very little psychological research on LGBTQ immigrants at the time. So to get anything in there, I really feel like, if I hadn't been there, I still believe that would not have been included. And so that really, I think, taught me how important it is to have a seat at the table, or like to just dare to show up and see if they'll listen to you. And I've been amazed time and time again that people actually listen to me. I should get over that at some point, but I have found that if I can kind of figure out a way to be asked in, that then the concerns that I have, the underrepresented populations that I care about, can have representation. So, figuring out how to utilize my professional skills to give me access to these places where policies are being created and things like that. More recently, I am co-chair of the LGB guideline, let's see, what is it called? The Revisions for the LGB Guidelines Task Force. And the reason that I even considered being a part of it is that I really think it's important that when we're thinking about sexual orientation, that we are considering international perspectives as well. So like to not only think about what it means to be a sexual minority in North America, but to think about how these documents get translated into languages and used around the world. And so that was kind of my impetus to say that I want to, take this on and be a part of that. So I think for me, kind of marrying activism and psychology has been a matter of trying to figure out like where I see the gaps. And oftentimes I do things because I feel like this is really important and somebody needs to do this, and who can do this? I need to find somebody that I can ask to do this, and then realize like, oh, I guess I have to do this. And that's kind of been my career for a while. So it's been interesting but meaningful.
Great. Thank you so much for sharing and for sharing how some of what's happened in your own personal life has influenced what paths you've taken, as well as having that international focus. So for the attendees who just joined, we're now going to proceed to questions that have been submitted by those who RSVP'd, and then towards the end, there will be a space for questions from those who are currently attending. So one question that was asked by multiple individuals was, how do you all find the time for activism? It sounds like for many of you, you've been able to integrate that into your professional life, but because a lot of our attendees are currently in graduate school, I guess, how did you find the time when you had other responsibilities like doing individual clinical work or teaching or TAing or doing research? Just how did you carve out that time, and what recommendations would you give for graduate students who are looking to do that currently in their career as well as later on?
I feel like I'm not the best role model about this, as is probably true of most academics. So as I'm doing a webinar sick. So I think it's hard, because on the one hand, I went into this profession to create change. And then as soon as I got here and got any power, realized that there's not a lot of time to do the things that I find most meaningful. So I have found it really tricky, but also the best thing to do is to find overlap, right? To find ways to, excuse me, to make the activism count, to use your skills in ways that are meaningful. I don't need to be on the streets and marching and demonstrating anymore, because it takes a lot of time and energy in a way that I don't have anymore. But if I can write a policy brief, if I can put out an article that helps people to demonstrate something that we've been arguing has been impacting folks for a long time, that ends up being more meaningful. My work being cited by the Supreme Court is much more meaningful and is going to move policies or create more change than me forcing myself to get on the streets to march. I think it's really being intentional about what are my skill sets, how can I best create change, and not burning out. I think the best thing is to figure out, because some of the stuff, if I didn't do it, my soul wouldn't be fulfilled and I wouldn't be able to do all the other stuff. So it's really prioritizing and being intentional about my time.
Thank you. Others?
I think that's a great answer. I think that for me, sometimes activism is self-care, although I have to be really careful because it can quickly become not that. But sometimes going out and being in a crowd of people is healing for me. So it's something that I'm doing to show my solidarity, but it can sometimes be something that I need. Other times I think that I get involved in a lot of different kind of committee work in different organizations because it gives me access to people who provide something for me, you know, other people who are passionate about an issue. And maybe I don't feel like I'm surrounded by that in my day-to-day life, but, you know, I seek that out. And so again, I have to be careful because I kind of find these ways to work to take care of myself. And it's a fine line that, you know, it's a work in progress.
Yeah, sounds like intentionality, like Nelly said.
Trying to, yeah.
Thank you. Gilbert or Jessica, anything you'd like to add?
Well, I think for me, it was, you know, I pushed my dissertation back a year, and it was, you know, I didn't have time. I just had to prioritize. This is what matters to me now. This is what I care about. And then finding individuals who would support me while I made that sacrifice. Because as a grad student, you're not going to have enough time to do a lot of this stuff. And, you know, every minute you spend doing activism is another minute you're not working on your dissertation or something else. So really putting supports in place for yourself to succeed while making those sacrifices, I think, is the most important thing.
Finding community.
And I kind of echo, you know, what has been said also. I think it really depends on what feels right for you, you know, in terms of your values. You know, as a graduate student, life is hard. You know, you're running the classes and externships and all sorts of things and trying to make ends meet. But it is really what you need, right, in terms of your activism to feel complete. And part of that is just planning, you know, how much can you dedicate realistically without being burnt out, you know, and how much do you need to do for your own self-care or according to your values. But a big part of that also, I think, is just collaborating with others that feel the same way you do about the issues that you care about, be it professionally, you know, having those collaborations professionally with people that are, you know, social justice minded, that are working on these issues, which also, even if you can't, you know, do a protest or, you know, commit more time, you're collaborating and learning what's going on and still being involved in things, even if it is just connecting. Mm-hmm. So it really just depends on where you're at and what you need.
Yeah, so the theme of collaborating with others and finding community and support sounds really important.
Yeah, and I just wanted to echo what Gilbert said about, you know, kind of slowing down in the dissertation process. I mean, I did the same thing. I feel like I had a lot going on, you know, personally, and was involved in a lot of activism at the time. And I felt very strongly, and I felt fortunate that I could make this decision for myself, but I felt very strongly that this is my life now. I'm not going to wait until, you know, when I'm in a when, you know, once I achieve this goal or that goal, and then I'll start living the life that I want to live, but really feeling like, you know, this is, I need to be congruent to who I am as much as I can. And, you know, if other people don't respect or like that, or, you know, I lose opportunities because of it, then, you know, that it's probably going to lead me to where I'm supposed to be in the long run. So kind of just giving myself permission that if I'm going to do all of these extra things, maybe I am going to slow down. Maybe I'm not going to meet the benchmarks as quickly as my program wants me to. But, you know, I have my degree now, and, you know, it doesn't matter in the end.
May I add also a counter to that, or not a counter, but a different. So I actually decided to not have a great dissertation. And so, instead of, there were a lot of things that I had gotten involved in with my program and with my university around activism. And at some point I had to decide that I don't need to change them and I need to get out. And so I made the intentional choice to do a good enough dissertation that never got published, but that it was more important. And I did this in consultation with a lot of folks who were on my side at the time, but I did a just good enough dissertation, and then I got the heck out of there. And then I think I did a lot more good afterwards. So there are lots of different ways that it can look, but you kind of have to be intentional about picking and choosing what is most important to me right now. And maybe you can't have it all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And something I want to add too, because, you know, I elongated my time also. My dissertation kind of, you know, I wanted to do other things, but my other things was, you know, because I love social justice and I want to change, was to find opportunities that would that felt true to me in terms of how I wanted my profession to look, how I wanted my practice to look as a psychologist. So, you know, I applied for policy internships as a psychologist. I looked for other opportunities where I could integrate my activism into my professional work. And, you know, that's something that you have the freedom to do as a student, you know, like as a graduate student. How do you now mold what you want your future to be too? You know, even if it means, you know, not following the traditional trajectory of things, you know, how do you find those things that you can integrate your activism, your personal passions and your professional passions, even before you get out, even before you have the freedom to make what you will, you know, because it's out there. You just might have to look a little bit or network a little bit.
Yeah. So there's some like a theme of kind of self-determination and not letting what the ideal of what a graduate school career might have to look like and what you actually want to accomplish. That's great. One question that also many people ask, which is kind of like a counterpoint to the community, is what do you do when you have colleagues who are opposed to self-activism? So in terms of when you were a graduate student or in your current career, wherever you are, how have you dealt with people either in similar positions of power, or people who have more power to you, or even students who expressed opposition to you in your efforts?
I don't have a good answer for that, but I will say there's always someone who has more power than you, and they always have an opinion about what you're doing. So I think so I won't say that it doesn't matter. It does make life more difficult, you know, being vocal and just acknowledging that. I don't have an answer, but that's just my observation.
So I was thinking, I like what Nadine said, that there's no easy answer to this. And oftentimes I try to remember that the reason, I say this a lot when I talk to folks, that we weren't made to be in the academy, right? Like the institutions weren't places that were designed for people like us, and certainly weren't designed for people like us to go and disrupt and be activists. And so a lot of times I find that when my colleagues and those who are above me are telling me that what I'm doing is wrong or somehow opposed to what I'm doing, it feels a little bit like I'm on the right path, right? Like if they supported me, then I would be part of the status quo. So, and in the moment, it's often hard to remember that. But, you know, I have colleagues and peers that I can go to that reminds me, like, of course they would be opposed to that, right? Like these are, when you think about it, sometimes those are your marks of success, right? So my department has had a lot of attacks by like alt-right media outlets and people infiltrating our healing circles, things like that. And it's scary, yes, but it's also a mark of, you know, success, right? Like we're doing something that that folks who are opposed to us don't want us to be doing, and they're trying to scare us away from doing it. And and so what we're doing is we're gonna support each other even more. So I think that the fears, the scare, you know, how it feels and what it does to your career is real. And so you have to kind of weigh that, right? Like I think it's more important for me to stay in the academy and to get promoted and to be a fixture here for other young activists who want to come through. And so I need to be intentional and about the causes that I take up and when I put my name on the line. But it is a choice each and every time.
Yes, I love that reframe. Even when sometimes what you feel or what you do gets some negative attention, that might be something that you're doing the right thing. So.
Right.
Great.
I think for me, I think about two things. I think about, you know, what like we mentioned, the power dynamics. Can I actually have this conversation? Do I have any power in this situation? Is this person even willing to listen? And then I always do like a sort of like self-check. Is my mental health in a place where I can have this conversation? Because I think it's a lot of emotional labor to have these conversations with individuals, even if you're on an equal level. When, you know, it's something you care about so much, like, you know, things that you consider civil rights, essentially, that you think everyone should have, and then some people are like, no. Those conversations are really hard. So just, keep track of, am I in a space where I can actually have this conversation with this person? Do I have the resiliency, because I don't know where this conversation is going to go. It could end up getting really ugly. There are possible repercussions negatively, especially as a student, depending on who you're talking to. So just to keep that in mind, and to have if you're feeling like it's a really risky conversation, to have people there with you who can even attest to what you're saying, and because I've had it happen before where people will twist what I'm saying, and then that's really a scary place to be when it's your word versus someone else's word, especially as a student. So if you want to have that conversation, you're not feeling safe, maybe to have someone else there as well.
So being really intentional about the emotional labor and potential repercussions.
This question kind of is very near and dear to me, because I've experienced a lot of opposition, given, in our professional realms. Not everybody thinks the same way we do. Not everybody has been trained the same way that we have. So I've experienced a lot of kind of different views and even opposition to different things. And it's really uneasy. And, as a graduate student, especially when you're in training, it feels even more isolating. I think that if you are in that position, you do have to, gauge the situation. Can you talk to this person depending on what it is, how open they are? And kind of echoing what Gilbert said, can a conversation even be possible, but also, is it even appropriate, right? How relevant is it to your work, and what are the consequences if you bring it up? But on the other side, I think regardless of if you bring it up or not, finding people to connect with and consult with is vitally important, because it can have a lot of consequences in your own mental health, right? And your own feelings of isolation if you don't find people that do feel the same way you do about those issues. So even if you don't make a difference in whatever setting it is, finding your tribe, and I think, AAPA kind of does that, right? Like, we're oftentimes in settings where we're not around people that are around us, that don't have the training, that have issues, that they don't care about the same things we do, given our worldview, their worldview, and their training. If they're, if they're 20 years older or 40 years older, and if they're in a more homogeneous environment. But finding community, even if you're in opposition in different settings, I think is vitally important.
Thank you. Yeah. So kind of building on that note, the theme of communities come up a few times. So I was wondering, where have you each been able to find that in various stages of your career, whether it's professional organizations or other ways? Where have you found the community that supported you in your efforts?
AAPA. A plug out for our organization. The Leadership Fellows Program, which is about to take applications again. We have the Leadership Institute, so there's other organizations, but I think outside of organizations, I've also found support. I have found that when I'm in my institution and I go to workshops, or when I give these panels, or when I have an opportunity to put my voice out there, that if I speak my truth, my people will come to me. And so a lot of the folks that I've met, I feel as though I've met because when I'm authentic and real, and I speak my truth in moments of power, that folks come out and find me. And at my institution, a lot of my friends and colleagues here who are like-minded we have found each other, because we're also people who have put our perspective out there. So if you think about whenever you put your voice out there, that you're speaking to your community, then they will come, instead of trying to please those who you're not really trying to be in relationship with.
Great, thanks, Emily. Other perspectives?
I feel like it's been a little bit of a snowball that, wherever I go, not always, but oftentimes I find someone and pick them up, and they're now part of my my support network in some way. Maybe not on a regular basis, but just knowing that that I have in my mind different people that I can go to for different things related to, my professional life and my my values. So for me, AAPA is one place. Division 44 has been another place. A lot of times through service, I have found other people who, are willing to also do the work, who are willing to basically, show up and for little accolades, do a lot of heavy lifting. So I think if you go into the places where that feel comfortable for you, kind of similar to what Natalie said, that you end up attracting or finding those other people who just happen to be there doing similar things. And so I often think about it as like peer mentorship, because in some ways it's a support system, but it's also like it oftentimes feels like more than just a support system. I don't really know how to explain it beyond that, but
Yeah, great. Yeah, it's putting yourself out there and also being authentic when you put yourself out.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think recognizing that a lot of times I do need something, that I have needs, that it's okay, that I can't do this in isolation, and that I don't want to do it in isolation. And as much as it's work, and it can be exhausting, it also has to be like fun and rewarding. Otherwise it's just an exercise in like torture or something.
Like, honoring your own needs, I feel like it's really powerful. Oftentimes activism seems like you're doing it.
Mm-hmm. I think for students, I think it's, especially students in these doctoral programs, it's very easy to sort of get into this tunnel vision where like the entire world is just your academic program. And if that's not like a supportive environment, that can get like pretty kind of depressing. But this is going to sound a little cheesy, but the world is a bit bigger than that. So even at your institution, there are probably other grad students and other graduate programs who do care about social justice. So if they're not there in your program, figure out a way, and there may be already ways to meet those students in other programs. And to sort of remind yourself of that it's not just the people in your program.
That's helpful to hear, considering I think a lot of our attendees are grad students, to remind ourselves that the world is bigger. So.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think a lot of times it can feel so isolating, because whether it's in your graduate program or in your workplace even, you'll find that there are not oftentimes very many vocal voices, like yours. And, I've talked to folks in my network about this often, that, it's sort of like, why can't we all be in the same place? It would be so great if we could all, work together or something like that. But that's never, ever going to happen, because it would be way too disruptive. Like, no hiring committee wants to have all of these, opinionated activists in the same department. And probably the same thing for graduate programs. Like, one is okay, we can manage one. But if there's a whole group, that's threatening. And so I think that we are, by design, sort of sprinkled throughout, different places, and that we have to find each other. That's like part of the game, part of the challenge.
Yeah. And I think it's the search. I think it is what you need and what resonates with you. I mean, I know, the original question is what your community. For me, it is AAPA, but it's also DOSA. And I think that's why we have all of these mentorship programs, we have people that, that can connect with you, they can give you advice, they can identify with your experience. And, I think sometimes we're lucky enough to find people like us in our settings, but a lot of times, depending on where you're at, in terms of the program or the geographic location, we don't, and oftentimes you leave, right? And you're like, well, psychology is just X, Y, and Z, and it might not necessarily reflect the entire practice or everybody encompassed within it, but you don't have access to them. So I think a big part of it is searching for your community if you feel you need to, or if you feel, you know, isolated in some way. I know that I had to, and, you know, it was really difficult, you know, at a time where, you know, APA wasn't that big. Those didn't even exist. You know, there weren't even many students of color, you know, in some of the programs I was in, let alone actually discussing issues competently. And same thing in some of my workplaces. So it's really finding people that you connect with, and also making the space that you make it come, that you bring your voice, you know, that you cause change in the setting that you're in. I think that's also a big piece of it, connecting, but also still voicing your opinion, still connecting with others. And even if it's subtly showing that, you know what, the issues I'm talking about are important. And so let's start to bring that in our practice, be it initiatives or whatever it is. You know, you, even as a student, you have power to bring change, long-lasting change.
And I'll add too, like, you know, in some, you know, I'm kind of near the border, and this is a somewhat small town, and, you know, sometimes people, you know, are in communities where there really maybe not be anyone, but, you know, social media is bad for so many reasons, but one thing that I think is good about it is people can form online communities now. So, you know, that people can start groups for, you know, students of color and doctoral programs. I'm sure they're out there, and you can connect with people that way. So there's always a way to connect. You just sometimes maybe have to be a little bit more creative.
Gilbert, I really want to build well off of what you were saying, because as others were talking, I was thinking, you know, I started off in AAPA not knowing a single person. I came with no advisor, and I feel like one of the things that, as we all kind of fight in our activism for inclusivity and diversity, that if each of us invites others who aren't already in a circle into a circle, right? Like that you can have the community you want so long as your community isn't exclusive. And if you are always open to including others, then as our communities grow, right, that there's always room for more individuals, that there are so many individuals saying that they wish they had community. So the individuals can make a community as well.
Thank you, everyone. That was riveting. In terms of being able to really seek out the opportunities to connect with others, and agency in that. So at this point, I wanted to open this up for questions from those who are attending the webinar. So if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A option and just like type them in, and then I will read them. And feel free to just do that until the end. If you don't have any questions, that's fine, because we have 40 more that were pre-submitted, and we won't get to all of them. So just to let you know that if you want to, if you have any particular things you'd like to know about, we'll prioritize what we would say. But if not, we'll just keep going with the questions that have already been submitted. Okay. So while people type out their questions, if they're doing so, one question that I thought was particularly interesting, I'm going to just read it because it's a little complex. So I found it hard to ask the right questions of organizations in job interviews to find out how much they truly care about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They talk the talk, but don't walk the walk. Any questions you'd suggest that would help me find out if an organization truly cares, so I'm not outnumbered and potentially squeezed out when bringing up these issues? And because I think a lot of our attendees are graduate students, maybe thinking about this in terms of academic positions or even like clinical placements or policy organizations. Any perspectives on that?
So I definitely just went through this because I'm on internship now, and that was something that was very anxiety provoking for me because I care so much about this stuff. And, you know, internship, you're just getting matched somewhere, right? You're not picking where you're going. And I don't know if this, you know, maybe rubbed some university counselors the wrong way, but I, you know, asked people when they gave me an opportunity for questions, how their university counseling center was, you know, responding to the current socio-political climate, what had happened on campus and how they're managing it. And I got a whole range of different answers. Some university counseling centers were like, you know, we just try to make everyone, you know, feel accepted and welcome to walk in. And I was like, well, that's how you should be operating 365 days a year all the time. You know, how are things actually different? And then, you know, I really liked the response of some of the internship sites, and So you kind of have to be willing to ask tough questions, I think, like that, that may steer some people the wrong way and make them not like you. But, you know, if you're ultimately wanting to go somewhere where you really want, you know, can fit in, you have to ask that tough question.
Thank you.
I think it depends. I mean, I think it's important to know what it is you're looking for in a job. I mean, some folks are looking to be in places where they can create real change in ways that will move the meter. So you might not be looking for a place where you'll be very comfortable and where it will be, you know, where there might be a lot of Asian Americans or people of color, for example. This is my second academic position. And so I feel like I've gone through the job market twice now for academic positions. And so the questions that I asked in my second interview that I wish I had, that I feel like I did get answers to the first time, but are more telling and I didn't believe them the first time, probably are around like mentorship and like research projects, things like that, where people, I remember at my first job, folks were very territorial. And so I think that when people give you different answers to questions that are really important to you, that's a sign that there's no consistency within the setting, right? And so there was a lot of like people saying that they work together, but then in projects there was nothing that anyone was actually working together on, or you know, they say that they mentor people, but like there was more like owning of people. They say that they were a more diverse school, but it was more that they enrolled a lot of, you know, they would enroll diverse students, but they never had any services that would support those students, right? So really looking to see that their values are aligned in how they spend their resources and how they allocate their time, how, you know, like, so do the behaviors fit the values that they're espousing, right? You might not get a lot of choices your first time, you know, your first steps out of graduate school, and just know that like, hold on to who you are. Maybe this is a stepping stone, right? Like it's not uncommon to jump positions, especially if your goal is to stay in the academy. So maybe that first position is just to get the publication wheels rolling. And then the second position will be one where you really are going to be focusing on having the workplace that is, you know, where you want to stay long-term, and that would be okay. So, you know what questions are important to you and ask them of everyone and see if their answers vary or if they are consistent across the board. And that will give you a good sense. And then believe them. I think the hardest thing is believe the information they tell you, or believe the inconsistency that you see, right?
Thank you. Yeah, asking tough questions seems to be a theme. And also kind of knowing what you want ahead of time.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Or Nadine, do you have anything you'd like to add that's been shared?
Well, I mean, I guess for me, it depends on, you know, if it's an academic program, are you looking for a job? I mean, if it's a job, right, I think you have a little bit more freedom. But even if it's an academic program, I guess what is the definition of the organization, right? That, you know, that we're talking about. And given that, like if it's a clinical setting, right? Say it's your practice, right? Or, you know, whatever the clinical practice is it, I mean, there's data for that, right? Does this center deal with the public sector, right? What are the initiatives? Even regardless of whatever the organization is, you always can see the, you know, the outcomes research, right? Like, have they produced this program? Do they have these initiatives in place? You know, what is the work that they're currently doing or have done? And the faculty there, you know, if it's like a workplace, if it's an academic medical setting, what are the interests of the people there and what work are they producing? What are they doing right now? You know, and you know, I know that it can be awkward, but reaching out to people, you know, that if it's a position, finding other people that you can connect with that work there or that are in those programs and asking them what their experience is, you know, and what they do in terms of, you know, if they're saying that they value multiculturalism or diversity or whatever it is, what is the behavior, what is the work, right? And if that is enough for you or not. But on the flip side, if it is a place that you want to be at, say it's a job, right? If you're working with, like I do, like, you know, underserved, like in a hospital setting, all my people are underserved, and they're primarily multicultural populations that are all impacted by systemic issues of inequality. I might not have people doing the exact work I want, but I could do it, right? So do you have the power and the space to produce what you want to see, given what that organization is, given what that setting is, right? And then that could make it more comfortable and more enriching for you. So I guess it really depends on what it is. And even if it's a program that you want to go to, if you have a faculty member that cares about what you're doing, or if people just aren't informed about how important that issue is, if you bring it to the table and encourage people to get involved, that's also something to consider as well.
Yeah, thank you.
I feel like I have a little bit of a defeatist answer for this, which is that I feel like a lot of the times that I have applied for and gotten whatever it is, graduate school or internship or a job, that I have felt limited in other ways. So it might be, where will I feel safe going? Like I didn't apply broadly across the United States. There were places that I felt that I didn't feel brave enough to move to because at the time I felt really vulnerable. And so that left me with like a handful of offers. And I had to consider things like finances, like, what place is going to give me the best package so that I don't go into as much debt as I might go into someplace else, or what job is going to give me more money. That it hasn't always just been about the fit. So I think having to keep in mind, like, what is it that I'm trying to get out of this? What am I going to get for it? So it might not feel that great, but maybe I'm going to get, that I will get the training that I need to get for this 1 year, or I will get, whatever it is. And then, in terms of my job, sometimes I feel like there's plenty of things I could complain about, but, I remind myself that it's a job, they pay me money, and I get to do what I want. So it doesn't always feel like I'm in an environment that completely gets me or supports me. But I get to oftentimes work with students that really fulfill me, and I get to choose the things that I do with my time. So it's a balance, could it be better? Sure. But it's not, I am getting something out of it too, so.
Great, thank you. Being realistic, it's still what we can expect. It's for trying to make the decision on what our values. So there were two remaining questions that I felt like were most pressing from what's been submitted. Maybe if we have time for there will be another. So another question, was tips for when and how to be patient and stay motivated toward the cause when you feel like change isn't happening.
That's a hard one. I'm not very patient. But change takes time, and a lot of it. So I feel as though my patience has come in seeing small wins. And so not looking for the big wins right off the bat, but realizing that change happens, a small change. Sometimes the small change is with one person, and being satisfied with that. To want big change, but have not dedicated the time, like a decade or a lifetime. I think, I think it's really important to think about, like, what can you accomplish in a lifetime? What can you accomplish in a career? What can you accomplish in, a decade, and then all the way down to today, right? Like, so to see our every small win helps to make it more gratifying as we're waiting for the large change. And oftentimes I feel like now that I'm, a decade into my career, I'm starting to finally see some of the small wins that I started a decade ago. And they really did take that long. And having that support network, I really do think doing this in community is the only way to do it for me, because I need the people around me when I'm being impatient to remind me that it's okay that this is happening slowly, as long as it's moving. And then, you know, as it's moving forward, right, that it's going to backtrack, and then it's going to come back and it's going to backtrack some more. But that the progression is always, you know, better. So no real good answer.
I think I have two kind of answers. One is related to like activism and change, and you know, we're in a time right now that feels extremely bleak. But thinking back, I can say that I never would have imagined that I would be where I am now, and have like, you know, the rights that I have now 10 or 15 years ago. So, you know, my wife's a U.S. citizen now. We're married. We have kids. Like, these are things that didn't seem possible 10 years ago or 15 years ago. And the change about those issues was really slow. And then all of a sudden there was quick movement and change happened. And then it was like, oh, okay. And then that's the new reality. And so I think it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in a linear way. It's like you can be chipping away at something for a long time and not see any change. And then all of a sudden there can be change. So just, I guess, having faith that it does matter, even if you don't see the change immediately. And this can be true interpersonally too, with, you know, people in your life and like the conversations that you have with them or with clients, you know, that you don't see that change happen just because you put something into something, the output doesn't immediately occur. And I mean, it can be frustrating, but I think that's how that seems to be consistent. The other part about, can you repeat the question again?
Yes, so tips for when and how to be patient and stay motivated.
Okay, staying motivated, yeah. The other part that I would say is celebrate often. That's sort of like my motto. I think we have a tendency, like as soon as we have a big win of some sort, we move on to the next thing. Like, okay, I accomplished that. Okay, now I have to keep accomplishing something new because, you know, I'm not taking the time to pause and appreciate that I did that thing. And whatever that thing is that you submitted, you know, the next chapter of your dissertation or like whatever, if you're not celebrating it as it's happening, you're going to be so burnt out by the time you're done that, you know, you might not even care anymore. So I think it kind of goes with my other motto of like living your life as it's occurring. And so like not putting off, sort of appreciating what you've accomplished and the work that you're putting in to kind of make that part of the process for yourself so that it can be sustainable.
Can I add one more thing that you just reminded me of, Nadine? I think it's also easier to have patience when you remember that it's so important for you to just show up. That you don't have to, that are very showing up for many of us, that if you just show up, that is change. Like your very presence, your very being where you are is change in and of itself. So if we just merely just show up each and every time, that is change, and it's becoming more of the norm. And so that too helps us to get to the bigger change that we're looking for. Okay, that's it.
And, you know, I have to say that, you know, waiting for change, and especially in an environment that, you know, isn't changing fast enough, can be very suffocating. You know, it can be frustrating. It can feel stagnant. So again, that community is so important. You know, if it's online, if having that community where you can voice, you know, your frustration or share, you know, why isn't this happening? Or just having people that still feel the same way you do is so important. But another piece of that is keep on saying and doing. You know, even if the change isn't coming, you keep on, you're a participant in that change, even if the change isn't coming as fast as you want. And to never forget that, because that's how that ultimate change, that's how all those small steps occur. So I think recognizing that, you know, the world isn't going to be equal in a day. You know, where we want to be is going to take time, but also just keeping on doing. Just, I think even though motivation can sometimes feel low, and that's when you need your community the most, you know, just keep on, even if it is, you know, your research, right? Even if the change isn't coming, but putting out, you know, research or, you know, that is true to you and that might take steps towards that change. You know, again, like recognizing our practice in psychology comprehensively, the research you produce can go towards policy. It can go towards program development. It can provide evidence for those populations that we're helping that we want change for, right? Even if it's not specifically a publication in terms of a journal, but even an editorial, right? Still keep on doing. You know, that in itself will help you keep on being motivated, you know, and connected.
And I'm not a very patient person either. So if I'm not seeing change in one area, I might go somewhere else and then, you know, do something where I know I'll see some change happen quickly. So like, you know, helping sign up students for DACA or something like that, I can feel really good and you're making a meaningful change, but on what scope, what level? But I guess to not put maybe all your eggs in one basket and to have, you know, several things that maybe you can see some change in some areas, but maybe, you know, in your sort of thing you really care about, it's a bit slower, so it doesn't feel completely stagnant.
Great. Thank you all for that. Yes, some common themes of celebrating small wins, celebrating in general, as well as continuing to show up and reminding yourself that showing up and just keeping on going is important. So I want to be sensitive to people's time. I think I'll ask one more question and then we can wrap up so people who might go can go. So one question I also found interesting was if you could go back and do something different in your development as a activist scholar, activist practitioner, however you self-describe, what would it be?
For me, it would be finding people that shared my same struggle earlier. I think, you know, oftentimes when we do get involved in activism, or even before that, wanting, you know, in our own personal lives, right, what we want change for, a lot of times we've experienced it, right? And I think, again, that connection is so important to link up with others because that can provide, you know, a foundation for what we need to do. But also for me, it was probably, you know, seeing the big picture a lot earlier, you know, getting involved in policy work and seeing, you know, psychology is very, you know, what we do is impacted by funding, by policy in every single way, right? So how to see it from a social justice framework, a political framework, connecting all the dots, even though we're not trained to, right? When we go into a psychology program, you know, we're learning basic things first, but, you know, I wish I would have seen the big picture and, you know, become more involved in a lot of things earlier than what I had. Yeah.
Thank you.
I feel like the thing that I would go back and tell myself and try to change is something that I continue to work on. I feel like early on in my career, I think that I was able to become really successful in my career because I was really good at figuring out what the expectations were of me, around me, in academia and outside really quickly. And that I could adapt myself to achieve goals that people, or like, you know, I could meet the expectations, goals that I was supposed to meet for, like within my program and such, right? Like, so if I knew what the expectations were, I could meet them. And so I really became other oriented for a long time in my early career. And so it was, I feel like I got derailed when I took my first position because I was really in search of, okay, well, what do other people want from me in order for me to get tenure, right? Like, what am I supposed to be doing? And I lost sight of what I came into the profession to do. And it became, I struggled with my mental health and I struggled with like, well, why am I even doing this? Like, so I feel like I would go back to those early years and I would remind myself that like, you are smart enough to have this job. You know, I would work on my self-worth and really believing that like I was worth, that I'm smart enough to be here. Like my research is good and you know, my leadership, I'm not the imposter that I think that I am. And I feel like that's something that a lot of folks struggle with. I don't need to identify as a leader to do things that leaders do, right? I don't need to like I would work on that. And so really it would be my internal work. I would tell myself that it's okay to want the things that I want and to do the things that I want to do, so long as I meet the metrics to stay in my job. So I would stop searching for outside acceptance of my worth. Oh, and to add, because that outside acceptance often tended to be folks who were in support of a white supremacist system that wanted to hold me down in the first place, right? And the faces of those people were not necessarily white. And so it was confusing coming out of grad school, and going to a new state, a new city, and starting a new life, and not knowing, you know, losing your bearings a little bit. So having to realize like that self-acceptance needed to start from inside, and that white supremacy could look like something familiar as well. So yeah, I'll stop there.
I think for me, building, like someone else said, building that support system earlier, and realizing that I'm, you know, not my best activist self when I'm really angry, and that, you know, you're kind of, you know, anger is at times kind of necessary, but if you're kind of consumed by it, you're not going to be a very effective activist. So even seeing like a, you know, multiculturally competent therapist to help you sort through those feelings and come at it from a place of more like still anger, but I don't know what the word I'm trying to sort of sum it up, but some peace and some sort of being centered, I guess, while sort of pushing forward. And that's when, in my 2 cents at least, that's when activism is the most effective.
I think for me, it would be something along the lines of just trusting myself to figure out how to get where I want to go. I feel like a lot of my career has been, you know, from being a graduate student on, has felt like I'm just kind of meandering. Like I don't know where I'm going, or I'm putting one foot in front of the other, but it, you know, I don't know if it's going to make sense in the end. And, you know, I tell my students that my CV looks really good. It looks really well planned out, and it wasn't, and it didn't feel that way when I was doing it. That it felt like I was just making it up as I went along. And but I can tell the story now, and it actually makes sense. It didn't feel like it made sense at the time. So I think there was a lot of anxiety, you know, in the process of not feeling like I knew where it was all going to lead me. And so I guess if I could tell my younger self, you know, basically like that it's going to be okay, or that I'm going to get where I need to be eventually, that it doesn't have to look pretty in the process or something like that. Yeah, something like that.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to add, you know, something that I wish that I would have known, you know, earlier, was not to be scared, you know, not to be scared about speaking up, you know, and to realize that in all of your journey, you have power, even if it doesn't feel like that sometimes, especially if you're a student. You still have power and you still have a voice, and it can be scary to use it, you know, when you're being evaluated and, you know, in training, but you have a voice and you do have power, and to recognize that, and to know that that's still a powerful tool. And you don't have to wait to say things.
And sort of to add on that, there's almost some power in being a student because you're allowed to make mistakes. Mm-hmm. A bit more forgiving on you, I think.
Thank you all. Yes. Themes of definitely perseverance, and also I really appreciate how it may seem, things might seem really messy and chaotic in the moment. Having faith in your voice and that it might work out for your own. Any last words before we wrap up? Any things that you feel like would be really relevant to share about your journey in activism?
I would add, I think built on what Gilbert was just saying, Karen Tsumoto once told me that, you know, so everyone, when you get your first position, people tell you to be a fly on the wall until you get tenure. And she always told me not to, because, you know, tenure takes about 6 years. At the end of 6 years, you won't know yourself anymore. You won't have a voice. You will have assimilated to the way that that system works, and you will have lost yourself. And so my best advice to you is to know who you are and to not lose sight of that, right? If those aspects of you need to hide out for a little while because it's not safe, then make it an intentional choice. But, you know, put that cape back on as soon as you're ready, or find other spaces where it's okay to be that part of yourself, but don't lose sight of it. You won't know who you are if you stop doing it now, right? And you don't hold on to it somehow.
Great. Thank you so much, Nellie. And thank you to the person who in the chat said that you gained a lot from the webinar. It's a very positive reinforcement. So thank you so much for all the panelists and your time. We really appreciate it. And thank you for all the attendees for being willing to listen and learn. We have recorded this webinar, hopefully, and we'll be sending it out, hopefully. So thank you all again. And again, this was sponsored by the Asian American Psychological Association's Division on Students. If you have any questions or concerns about this topic, we'd love to connect with you. So you'll be hearing from us. And thank you again to all the panelists. Really great.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so with that, I will end this meeting. Okay. Thank you. I hope everyone has a great rest of your day and a great start to your weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.